Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. But so let's move to the sort of uber topic that we're going to be now going into, which is the kind of sequence of things coming out of Google I/O and sort of continued a little bit into GML, Google Marketing Live this week with around AI, because that was all about AI. So, AI overviews and the Sundar Pichai Verge interview and AI organized pages and some associated stuff. So, David, what caught your attention?
Sure, all of those things caught my attention, so I won't take all of them. But I think the one that I flagged for us earlier this week that I did want to talk about today was Mark Traphagen from SEO Clarity had made a post on LinkedIn referencing the Verge interview with Sundar Pichai and how he said that the sites that were referenced in AI overviews were getting more clicks than they would have gotten in a traditional organic result. And we saw something to that effect, mentioned elsewhere. I don't remember if it was in a Liz Reed blog post or maybe even on stage at I/O.
Both.
Yeah. So we've seen this kind of theme, and clearly Google recognizes that this is a concern for a lot of people, not just in the SEO community, but sort of the quote unquote publisher community writ large, that everybody's somewhat concerned about what this might do to the open web if nobody's clicking through anymore, which is not a new concern that any of us have had over the last decade. But so anyway, there's clear sensitivity here. And essentially what Mark, the conclusion that Mark Traphagen came to is okay, and this is the one that I sort of posited as well, is the most likely way to read this comment is just that the sites that are getting clicks now from AI overviews were ranking so low in traditional organic results that they weren't getting clicked at all. And that even a dribble of clicks out of AI overviews is going to be more traffic than they would have received organically. And I think that that's largely what's happening here, based not just on Mark's comment, but others who have published data around where these results are coming from that are getting referenced in AI overviews. And a very astute commenter on LinkedIn, who I don't actually know, but he certainly got my attention, Cody Worth, said, well, this to me begs, this is Cody saying this to me begs the question, like, why aren't these sites ranking better in the traditional organic algorithm if they're good enough for AI overviews? And so I thought that was just an incredibly astute comment. And again, one more indication of just very lazy product management on Google's part to basically rip at, like, you have, in order to surface the sites that people are actually clicking on, you have to completely put a new module in the SERP. Like, that is their answer for a better search experience. It's not improving the algorithm or adjusting the way search results are displayed without using AI, right, which you're going to talk about, I think, with the AI organized pages. But like, all of these things are possible in Google's pre-AI sort of model. And the fact that they haven't been implemented, again, just shows like the entire company has been geared around turning the dials of advertising revenue at a predictable rate every single quarter, to the major detriment of any significant product innovation, right? They've done a lot of stuff that's behind the scenes, but the reality is the consumer-facing product has suffered over the last, in particular, I would say 4 or 5 years. And these AI overviews are, I think, just one more example of how bad or how significant the degradation of the traditional organic results has become. So,
well, it's really weird that, I mean, to pick up on this point about why aren't these sites ranking better? I mean, if we take Google at face value, the highest quality sites are going to outrank lower quality sites, which of course isn't true, but let's just assume that for purposes of this discussion. Are they then, in their own mind about what they're showing, are they then taking lower quality sites to be the source material for, often the AI overviews are verbatim, passages from, or near verbatim passages from the sites that they're referencing. So are they using this presumably lower quality material to fuel the most visible part of the SERP? It seems very strange to me,
Well, I would suggest several things. One is these smaller sites are unlikely to sue Google for copyright infringement, whereas a big site is much more likely to sue them. So I think it's a safer decision.
It's fair use, Mike. It's fair use.
Yeah, fair use. And I think Google would argue that just because it isn't as prominent, it may be just as relevant to the query. It's just an artifact of the ranking that they don't show. That's Google. That's Google's.
Well,
I think
totally. If that's the truth, why aren't those sites ranking better?
Well, because
it seems like
that's
a dial that you. It seems like that's a dial you might want to turn in the traditional organic algorithm. That's the case.
Well, Google has.
Well, one could say that maybe they're just as relevant. They're not more relevant, and they're not as prominent.
Google has kind of boxed itself in literally and figuratively by having these sort of dedicated modules now on the SERP, right? You've got the discussions and forums now, and you've got the pack, and you've got the organic stuff, and you've got the ads, and you've got they have these blocks that are more or less consistent across the pages. And one thing, and this goes to sort of service area businesses to some degree as well. One thing that I thought was kind of maybe the most interesting thing coming out of that Liz Reed portion of the I/O discussion were these AI organized pages, and they were referenced in Google Marketing Live as well.
Could I say one more thing about David's comment though, before you get
of course. Sure. Go ahead.
So the lack of product management vision is largely because of what Greg said. There's all these different components run by different teams being brought in because they're a bottom-up engineering team, and they're all fighting for the space. And this organizational structure that I talked about failing top-down and sometimes bottom-up is really at the core of this issue as well, right? It's the same problem that we're seeing reflected across Google, that they don't have great product management at a product level, because the product is an integration of all these engineering efforts that are allowed to run and test, and whatever one tests better surfaces, right? So the model has its limits. It's great at getting shit out the door. It's not great at getting shit out the door that works well. And if it doesn't hit a velocity, it doesn't ever get fixed. And so that's what we're seeing is an outcome of their chaotic development product cycle.
So I was going to talk about AI overview pages, but based on this, let's defer that for a minute and talk about the Sundar Pichai interview. We've seen Google employees, most recently, I'm blanking on his name, most recently a guy who left Google a couple months ago and was saying that the whole SGE initiative was a fear-based one, sort of like likened it to Google Plus. Mike, your discussion about, and David, your talk about the lack of product vision. To me, that's, if you haven't seen the Verge's interview with Sundar Pichai, it's well worth watching. It's the best interview with him that I've seen, where he's being asked difficult questions very directly that are relevant to all of these conversations that we're having. And he, Sundar is a very likable, friendly guy, and he always comes off as sincere and friendly, but he's very evasive and very political in his answers, and pivots to other things very often without giving a direct answer. And so you come away feeling, very unsatisfied with, depending on your level of cynicism, with what he's said. And the point I will make is that he's the CEO of the company, right? So he should really have this vision internalized. He should be generating the vision or have it really internalized. And at one point, he's asked, I think this is the Google Search Console question. He's asked, are you going to break out AI overview traffic? If it's doing such a great job for websites, are you going to break it out in Google Search Console? And he ultimately says, well, I mean, I may be conflating two answers, but at one point he says, defers to the search team. He says, well, that's really a question for the search team. He sort of implies that he doesn't really pay close attention, doesn't know really the answer.
Well,
and
it also reflects how Google works, which is bottom-up engineering decisions.
Yes.
And I think it's an honest answer, actually. And it speaks to the flaw of the structure. It's unlike Microsoft, which was able to bring in a very visionary person to create a cohesive, non-Windows view of the organization. He is brought in to manage these engineers, and that's a different problem.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing that right now. he's managing the engineers reasonably well, but he's not
Yeah.
managing the product or the product vision. And I think that's
his vision.
the
No,
issue.
I think he's managing Google's product vision, which is predictable quarter over quarter revenue for Wall Street. That is the entire vision
Yes.
of their company
Yes.
right now.
Yes.
That's true.
Exactly.
Maybe
Exactly.
that's true.
Totally. 100%. 100%.
I'm not sure I'm quite that.
Well,
I think there's that, but there's also these huge structural barriers for them to do it a different way.
But there's
That's
now this competitive threat, the dual competitive threats, TikTok and
Right.
what it represents on the one side, and AI now and what it represents, and that goes to the sort of fear comment that we've been talking about this for months and months and months. Google's product innovation is, at least in terms of search, has been very reactive, and fear is a dimension of that reactivity. I mean, I don't want to say anything negative about Sundar, the human being. I mean, seems like a
Nor
good
do
guy.
I. None of this
No, I'm
is
not saying
intended to
you
be
are.
ad
Yeah,
hominem.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
just I think that he has been put in a position because he is good at this thing, and that is what the board and the organization of Google has clearly been prioritizing for the last 6 or 8 years.
Yeah. No, and I wasn't trying to imply anything by my comment about what you were saying. I think that he is probably sincere, Mike, about his answers, but he should not have to defer. I mean, he should be able to articulate what's going on with their most important
Right.
product.
That's correct. He should, if he is not in charge of their vision, he should co-author their vision and integrate it with his. But that is, my contention would be that can't really happen at Google. That's not the company they set up.
Well, that's Prabhakar Raghavan, right? A man who is who I have met and think is a decent human being, who got slammed in that Ed Zitron piece about the man who ruined Google search. And since that time, he has not been. He wasn't at I/O. He wasn't speaking at I/O, and he didn't show up at GML Marketing Live. I mean, I haven't watched the entire keynote, but to my knowledge, he was not one of the presenters. I mean, it was Phil Schiller, who was the chief business officer, and it really should have been Prabhakar. So I wonder what's going on there. I mean, not to be a conspiracy tinfoil hat type, but I mean, it's just
David's got a
interesting.
few extra he can lend you.
Yeah.
Let me just go grab them. They're in the back office right over here.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about AI organized pages, because that was really it sort of flew by. I mean, it was mentioned at Google Marketing Live. It sort of flew by. It was mentioned in the Google blog post, in Liz Reed's presentation. All the focus really was on AI overviews, and that's what everybody has been focused on. But they introduced these pages that were theoretically dynamically generated. Maybe they're templated based on a vertical, and they said they're going to be rolling out in restaurants and maybe travel first. I don't remember, and then in a whole bunch of verticals after that. And these pages will be formatted in theory based on the query and based on a sense of what kinds of information are relevant to the query, and so you will get different looking pages for these different queries and these categories. And that, to me, is at once a better, we talked about this before, a better use of AI in a certain way, and a radical departure from what we're seeing today in search. And Eli Schwartz in his newsletter said this was the SEO apocalypse, or going to have to be a radical rethinking of SEO, and you disputed that, I think.
I did, and I do. I think it's a very
Yeah.
narrow view of what SEO is. I mean, SEO is about optimizing your assets for visibility and conversion in Google, and the website as the sole asset hasn't been true in local for 15 years. So I don't think that this may be an SEO apocalypse for a certain type of internet business, but it is certainly not an SEO apocalypse writ large. You are still, if you're a restaurant, if you're a hotel, even if you are a content publisher, like, you should still be thinking about, how do I get visibility in these AI organized pages? And even if that is sort of killing traffic to one particular type of content, it is theoretically expanding traffic to another type of content. So,
although I would say the apocalypse comes packaged in multiple forms. There's Hiroshima on one side, with the Holocaust. On the other is the frog boiling in the water, slowly, achieving a state in which they can't survive. And so,
but in this case,
is
the
not
frog
an
is very much
apocalyptic
aware
event.
it's being boiled.
Right.
The product is very much where it's being boiled, but I don't think it is not a sort of fall off a cliff event that these AI organized pages are purported to introduce. So
Well,
I would agree with that.
let me push back on the product, just sort of for rhetorical purposes here. Let me push back on the conversation we just had about the lack of vision in the product and these sort of dedicated modules, which probably will still be true in some sense, but
Yeah, but so
you
far
know,
below the fold, we'll never see them, right?
yeah. Well, this is an interesting, isn't this a product vision, right? Isn't this a blending of Google's traditional approach to search with now an AI approach that can more deeply understand the query and more appropriately deliver results based on what the inferred user intent is? I mean, it would seem to me to offer the hope, at least, of a more appropriate set of responses rather than, here's the ads block, which of course would probably still show up, and here's this component, and here's the discussions and forums, and here's all this Reddit and Quora crap, which is increasingly spammy. You know, this would seem to me to offer the promise, at least, of a better product vision. I mean, do you disagree with that?
I sort of disagree. And then I would also question the premise of sort of AI as the thing that enabled this. To me, there's no reason that Google couldn't have done this already with its existing both local and organic algorithms. I mean, there's nothing to nothing to
And they have
prevent
done it
Google
in
from
travel to some
introducing.
extent.
Right, exactly. So introducing these blocks in uh, for particular travel or restaurant queries where you actually don't see any organic results. Now, that would definitely run afoul of the DMA in Europe, but there's no reason that they couldn't have introduced this richer, smarter SERP on a category by category basis in markets where there is no self-preferencing regulation. So I don't know that AI is essential for this outcome. The second thing I'd say is it still feels to me to be a bunch of different modules put together by AI. And to Mike's point, on our last podcast, where they, threw up all the cards that they have in the air and they said, AI put them together and AI is the one writing the script. Like, that is exactly what it feels like. I'm not convinced that that's actually the best thing for users. We've seen people trying to use ChatGPT for local search and getting very simple, here are the 5 restaurants that I think you should try. And I would argue that's probably closer to what people actually want. But it's just not in Google's DNA to design a product that works that way. For all of the reasons that Mike has laid out on today's podcast.
Well, I mean, so I agree, but I think the problem with Google's current search experiences, from my point of view, is too much information, too much clutter, too much untrustworthy information, too many ads. So a simpler experience, which Perplexity or Gemini even could offer, is more consistent with what I think people want. And AI should be suited to delivering, according to whatever criteria, the best. If I'm looking for the best place to have brunch in Portland, Oregon, it should deliver the best 3 rated places and say, here are the favorites, and maybe here are some others, but these are the ones that are the consensus favorites. And AI is very well suited to doing that. But that's,
so what the AI should actually tell you is, how long are you willing to wait in line, and then let me refine your query based on that question. Right?
Well,
but
a conversation.
It's not going to do that. Yeah.
Right. And so it should, right. This is the faceted search example that we talked about months ago. Is like, I start with something very broad at the top of the funnel, and it takes me through a conversation in which more and more filters are applied, and eventually I get to the 2 or 3 things that I'm really interested in.
Right.
And you can do a version of that with ChatGPT. ChatGPT doesn't have the data right now, at least in the local space, to support that. I mean, notwithstanding their access to Bing, which is really mysterious why they're delivering such bad results when they've got Bing in the background. But that kind of thing, I think, is a much better experience. And Google claims you now will be able to do that with, more complex queries and follow-ups and so on and so forth. But I think that is ultimately the user experience that people want. But that would, and as you've argued, David, I mean, that doesn't compromise ads, right? You can show a bunch of ads against
Not
that
at all.
and get more and more specific to where the ad really is relevant in the end, notwithstanding all the, I mean, never mind all the BS about, yes, people in commercial context, people think ads are content, blah, blah, blah. This would be an improvement over that.
No, exactly. And so if you're an advertiser and you know somebody's concerned with the wait time, for example, you can say, "Hey, we offer reservations. Click here to make your, to book your time," right? And it's just like, I think that there's plenty of opportunities for Google to still make money here. It's just that they have not explored a, they have not done radical enough experiments with their user research to understand what the true possibilities are, even with their pre-AI toolkit, which is substantial, and I think we would all say is more substantial than any other would-be competitor in this space. And to me, it's like there's a lot. Yes, everything they've done with AI has been fear-driven. That's pretty. Like, I would stand by that statement. But even that sort of fear-driven reaction hasn't prompted a radical enough shift from the sort of Google way of thinking how to create a search result. So.
One of the things that the DOJ argues in its antitrust case that recently concluded is that, Google's monopoly position in search has enabled it to coast and raise prices for advertisers because it's got a kind of consumer lock-in for various reasons. And, this sort of lack of product vision in a certain way, or lack of experimentation, as you put it, is a function of their complacency and a function of their almost exclusive focus on quarterly revenue. And they claim in response, oh, we've done incredibly innovative things. And they point to Google Lens as a prominent example of innovation and other things. And while Google Lens is a powerful innovation as an alternative search input, these innovations really largely exist at the margins. Sundar said,
and that innovation lens used to be great because it would show me technical information of where this image occurred elsewhere on the internet. Now it shows me how much the plant costs at Joe's nursery, which I don't want to know, right? I mean, they've if you go to Lens, 80% of the answers are e-commerce
commercial
answers,
yeah,
regardless of what you're trying to get out of it.
Well, that just reflects Google's need to push more and get more and more revenue from.
I mean, all this being said, there's a tension at Google, both at a meta level between their zero-click need and their advertising need and the open web, and he seemed in that interview to be aware of that tension, painfully so. It creates a lot of business pressures on them one way or another. But all that being said, they are the only major web property that sends traffic to everybody else still. And so in their defense, and, when I look at our stats or the stats of any of the clients I'm consulting with, they do it and nobody else does. And that, is something.
In a local
maybe
context,
the boiling frog or the warming frog, but it is still significant.
In a local
context,
and
Google needs a large, expansive open web in order for their product to even have a purpose, right?
Right.
Sundar acknowledges that. Sundar acknowledges that in the interview.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that to me was hopeful. That was a hopeful moment in that interview because he recognized that if this comes out of, I think, the interviewer's question about small sites versus big sites and the House Fresh example. Does Google favor big sites? It's killing these small sites, which are the sort of lifeblood of the web, and less likely to be spammed. Less likely to be AI content. I think, and that was a hopeful moment. I was pleased to see that. So. Perhaps that's how we should end. That there's still, still hope potentially for Google, and it really comes in the form of competition. I mean, Google is only going to do better if they have real competition. So this is, my hope that Google continues to do some innovation and ChatGPT continues to put heat on them. So, all right. So we come to the end of another exciting episode. Be sure to tell your friends, tune in next week, and let us know how we're doing. Thanks.
Enjoy the long holiday weekend.
Yes, indeed.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.